Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have with me a very special guest, Heather Smith. Heather, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good now that this has been like 3 podcasts in a row where I haven't messed up my own intro. So I'm finally getting there. So I feel like I'm back in the big leagues or something now. So got to start somewhere. Small goals here on this podcast, just getting through the
Hey, it's an achievement. We'll take it.
I was getting tongue-tied. I don't know why last month, but it seems to be gone now. So I'm sure people listening are like, oh, finally, he got it right. We're going to start in right with that first question. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Oof. It's been chaotic. It's been long. It's been emotional and fruitful. But above all, it's been a very big learning experience. I started writing when I was in high school, but I really started taking it seriously and writing books when I was about 19. And I actually started with a totally different series than my first published book. I started writing a YA fantasy when I was 19. It took me about 10 years. And that's kind of what got me into the Wattpad universe. And that's where I first started, was Wattpad, because I really wanted feedback on it. But as I got into Wattpad, I really got into werewolf stories. I found that I really liked the paranormal universe and who's not a sucker for true love and love at first sight. I'm totally that fairy tale geek. So I was like, okay, this is cool. But and that's how I started. My first published book was Shadow of Twilight, which was a freaking roller coaster. It was a really big roller coaster. It was in a time of my life where Shadow of Twilight really gave me the strength that I needed to be as a person and as a woman and as a mother. Gave me the strength to leave a toxic marriage. And it's my writing journey has greatly affected my life in so many ways. And it's been amazing. And so, Shadow of Twilight, which is, again, it's my first published book, not my first written, but my first published. It's been amazing. It's been really amazing.
It's really interesting that you say, like, it's not your first book or your first published book. I just feel like there's so many female authors that I've interviewed for February She Wrote who have said the very same thing. And I think a lot of people, and that's like before we started recording, what I was saying about the one that I'm doing, I'm like, you know what? I'm like, it's okay. And I think it's just important to point out for the audience, it's okay, I think, if you have written a book or 2 or 3 and it's not your first published. I just think that's really important because there's just so many of you who have said that. And I'm like, I just think it's really important for people.
Well, you know what? I think the thing is too about it is, like, my first written book, I mean, it literally took me years to write. And in those years, I had grown not just as a writer, but as a person. So my writing style when I was 19 is nowhere near my writing style now. Like, so when I went back and I was editing and I was rereading, I was like, okay, this is a bit more immature than granted, yes, it is a YA, but it just reads immature. And so I got so nitpicky about it and I got frustrated with it and I had to put it down a lot. And it took me a while to develop, and it's going to be a lot longer of a series once I finally do get to finishing it and publishing it. Whereas like Shadow of Twilight was just bam, bam. Like I couldn't keep up with my thoughts. And I had written a book over 2 months. I had already finished half of the second book by the time I finished the first one. And I had already figured out how I wanted to end the 3-book series. And so it was like coming down from that. And then just my YI series just was like, okay, you're going on permanent pause for a little bit because this is what's right now.
Well, I think I like how you said, though, it's a pause. And I like that. And like, I've known people who get frustrated with those books and then they delete them. Like I had a friend, I was talking to Kelly McCullough about this, and him and I were talking. I'm like, and he said that, like, I can't, I'm totally blanking right now. Do you remember it was his webmate? Oh, he's actually the Fallen Blade series. I love those books. And he was saying how that wasn't one of his original ideas in books. And he, instead of deleting it or throwing away or trashing it or whatever, he's just saved it and he changed it later. And that
Well, that's
became,
good.
yeah, you know, and I'm like, well,
I
that's
think
one of
so
my,
many people do just like they get frustrated and then they do delete it. Granted, I wrote a book when I was like, I don't know, 15, 14, and I totally deleted it because it was absolute garbage. But there are moments where I'm like, oh, I kind of wish I had saved it because that was my first. Like,
yeah, yeah.
granted, it was more like fanfic than anything, but I
Well,
mean, it was still first.
yeah. Well, let's not forget though,
That's where a lot of us start, though. I think is fanfic and
yeah. Shades
taking
Grey fan.
characters. Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Of it
yeah.
was Twilight, right? I believe it was Twilight fan fiction, and then she just changed it and then put the
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yeah. You're totally right. Yeah, that's how a lot of books have started, to be
Yeah.
honest. And it's really cool though to see them take like original ideas and then turn them to something else. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
how so many authors and even movies and TV shows have started.
Yep, yep. Especially within the last, I'd say within the last 10 years. Just
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. The industry is, I don't want to say saturated because that sounds bad, but it's definitely becoming more populated by, original works,
Yeah, yeah.
written works that
Yeah.
are now turning into, TVs. And granted, I love it, but sometimes it's not always done, justice. So
Oh,
that is
yeah,
also
yeah.
frustrating.
Totally. Well, that's like for instance, like I'm a huge fan of Cobra Kai, and I like it because they pay homage to the original, but they're doing something new. But
Right.
it's such a hard thing to do. And I actually like I liked the last season, season 4, like I really did, but I think it was the weakest out of the rest of them because they tried doing something new with it, and
Right.
they still were trying to follow the old formula. So I think with season 5 they'll actually do really well because Netflix has gotten a hold of it, and that's the first one that they have actually written. But it's like I just agree with you. There's just so many. Like there's something else that came out yesterday, and my friend's like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, like for instance, Justified with Timothy Oliphant. Like they're doing a new season.
Hmm.
Well, like Turner and Hooch on Disney Plus. I love that show. It's a legacy. Like they took his
Right.
dad, with Tom Hanks, or yeah, and like just continued it. And I'm like, I like that. But if they just tried to redo the same thing, I'm like, that'd be so boring. And I agree with it. I just think there's so many times where, it is really hard to do something new,
Well, it's kind of like what they did with Charmed. The original
yeah,
Charmed
yeah,
series was epic,
yeah.
amazing. Like that shaped my entire childhood,
Great
adult,
urban fantasy.
amazing.
Yep.
And then they redid it. I won't put it on. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just I can't. Like those are the characters. And it's not even the fact like that they redid it. It's like you can't, that's just, or you can't redo that. Like it's
yeah.
just so original,
Yep.
and you're literally taking almost like the same plot. I don't know. I
No, I
couldn't,
agree.
I couldn't betray Charm that way. So I just never
No,
touched it.
yeah, my friend made a good point. He goes, I wish that they had done a legacy for that. Like,
Yeah.
had them pass on to their daughters or whatever. And I'm
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're gonna do it, at least have it be like the next generation
yeah,
or the second generation, something like that. But just to completely like redo it,
yeah,
why are you messing with something that was already so iconic?
yeah, yeah. And I think personally that's why like so many people like Cobra Kai so much is because it's a legacy. Like it's their
Right,
kids. It's a
exactly.
new group. You have the older
Mhm.
people. Even like the librarians, right? Like they don't even have, what I forget the actor's name, but the main librarian from the first 3 movies from TNT,
Mhm.
he's in it the first couple episodes. It's a legacy. And
Right,
that's another very popular show, urban
right.
fantasy wise from, early 2000s. And I'm just like, that's like somebody told me, they're like, oh, they're going to redo Castle. And I'm like, what do you mean they're going to redo Castle with Nathan
Yeah, you
Fillion?
can't redo it.
I'm like,
Yeah,
how are you going to replace him? And let alone him,
right.
the other actors and like, I'm like, how are you going to, replace Kate Beckett?
Spin-offs are one thing, like how Vampire Diaries had 2 spin-off shows,
Yep, yep,
had
yep,
originals and has literally legacies.
yep.
Like that's one thing. You have those original characters and
Yeah,
now
yeah,
they have their own thing, but you can't just, as popular of a show, you can't just redo it. Like
yeah,
you're it's almost like you're betraying the generation who was obsessed with that.
yeah, yeah.
Like, I don't know, that's just my opinion on it, but
Well, my friend, I just think it's funny you mentioned that because my friend said, he goes, that's why I like legacies. He goes,
yeah.
because otherwise you're ruining or tarnishing the original
Mm,
legacy. And for
yeah.
most of them, not all of them, granted, but for most of them. And I don't know. I just think with my friend made a point today. It's like with the writing and the stories that in the terms of books that people are coming up with and magazines and dramas, just all sorts of things, web dramas and things. It's like audio dramas. It's like, why are we going? I don't know. I guess
There's
I
plenty
get
of
that.
source material out there.
Yeah,
Like it makes no
exactly.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
like
I
let's just
completely
redo the same
agree.
thing. It's not going to be as good. We know that. Like Chips, like I don't understand why they had to redo Chips like they did. I'm like, and it's a comedy. I'm like, okay, whatever. But I'm like, that is nothing like the original Chips. And I'm just like, it was like Starsky and Hutch, like with Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson. I'm just like, okay. Like the only one I actually really liked was Hawaii Five-O and SWAT that CBS did. And I felt like they did a really great job revamping them for a modern generation. But I haven't seen very many other people do that. And yeah, I don't know. I agree with you. I just agree with you. I think there's too much of a saturated market. And honestly, if there's something new, I'd rather try that than try something that I liked that they're revamping. I just don't think it works very well. And not as well as, everybody's thinking.
But, I mean, there are exceptions, but they are few and far between.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know. You look at a book like yours and it's like, I'd rather see that on Netflix than a revamped or whatever. Like, I guess
I mean,
that was a legacy.
The cool thing is that they are coming out with so many more. And I like that they're doing TV shows for books now instead of movies. Cause I think, granted, it took them like 10 years to finally realize books don't really work as movies unless you're really like spreading them out. They have to be TV shows. There's just too much. You're doing a disservice to the book by trying to cram it into an hour and a half, 2 hour long movie. And you're going to have a pissed off readers. It's going to happen.
Who you want to be your viewership.
Who you want to be your audience, who you're trying to bring in. But it's like, okay, City of Bones, The Mortal Instruments. They did that 10 years ago. I was obsessed. I love Cassandra Clare. She is my number one author that I follow. Like, I'm literally obsessed with her writing. I love all of her books. When the movie came out, I didn't hate it. I didn't love it, but I could understand people who have never read the book were completely turned off by it. Completely understood it. The whole incest part, like, they did a really crappy job of explaining that. I totally understood that. But then when they did the show, when ABC picked up the show, that was better. I mean, it still wasn't, they did their own thing with it, which was, I was totally cool with. It was good. They still followed the same rhythm. It had still the same characters. And then they ended it. And I was like, but why?
Yeah.
But why? Like, you picked up something good. They had ran with it for like 4 seasons. Like, they did really good with it. And so, I mean, it's just kind of one of those things. It's like, I mean, it really just depends how it's adapted is the main thing. And like, they're picking up A Court of Thorns and Roses, Hulu is doing a show on now. Which I think all of, I say book talk because I'm on book talk most of the time, but a lot of us readers are really iffy about, we're like, you could really kill this, or you could really kill this. Like, there's so many ways this could go.
I think we're going to start to call it Wheel of Time it. Like, personally, like, and I'm one of those people where I love the Wheel of Time books, and I knew they were going to not, like, I'm like, how do you do 14 books? Even the first book, I go, how do you even do part of the first book in a 10 episode first season? I'm like, I knew they said that they were going to try and do a book
like Game of Thrones.
Yep.
I mean, do we even need to touch on that?
I still have not finished the last season, and I still feel good about the series. And my friends like, just never watch it and you'll be totally fine. And I do feel totally fine.
Game of Thrones is like, I read the books, but okay, don't shoot me. But Game of Thrones is one of those series where I couldn't connect to the writing. It was too many characters. It was too much for my brain to process. I need a little bit more simple. So there was only certain chapters I would read.
That's
when I was reading through. Like, I just couldn't do all of them. So I would read the main ones, like the ones that I know and I like. And so that's just kind of how I did it when I read the books. And then when it came time for the show, I loved most of the show. But then the last season, I enjoyed the season cinematically. It was beautifully done. The storyline and how they did it, the first 3 episodes were great. The last 3 episodes were like, really? Like, that's how you ended it. That's, even if that was how, George Martin really wanted to end this obviously it had to have been, he had to have signed off on it.
Yeah.
But even if that's how he wanted to end it, was that really how you had to shoot it? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, I think that'll go down in the history books as one that pissed people off.
Oh, for sure. And I just think if and I am totally like, and I'm not trying to say like that I actually like cinematically and taking myself out of the equation for knowing anything about the books for Wheel of Time. I liked season 1. I thought they had a lot of really cool things. I liked seeing, different fantasy. I thought that they showed that epic fantasy can be a TV series.
Right.
I think that season 2, they'll be able to catch their stride. There were things that they changed that I liked. Things about land. There was a lot of things. But like, I just like I Am Number 4 was one of my favorite young adult series. And they had brought out that movie, which I loved. Well, then when I read the books, I was like, but they had brought the movie out before the first book came out. So then I saw the movie and I read the book, and I'm like, I love the movie. I love the movie. But then when the book came out and I read it, I was like, this is so much better. And I was like, what did you do? And that's when I wish that Netflix would make into a TV series, because I think that they would just crush it, and it would be a really cool, like Vampire Diaries, but with aliens. I think it'd be really, really neat. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have enough faith in.
See, I feel like Vampire Diaries is one of those ones where I almost like the show better than the books. Like, I mean, yes, there was, of course, things that were different. I mean, like with any TV show that's been adapted from a book, they have to change things to keep.
Yeah, of course.
Like, you don't anticipate every single thing.
Yeah.
But, and I don't get me wrong, I love the Vampire Diaries books. I've read all of them. But it was just one of those shows I was obsessed with in high school. And that really, I just love the show. I felt like the show was just better than the books. And in my opinion, that's just my opinion.
I wonder how many people I'm going to make mad. So I've only read the first Bernard Cornwell book, The Last Kingdom, but Uhtred, like, I forget the guy's name, but the actor that they got to play Uhtred is just so charismatic. And then the guys that they got, all of the actors and
I love that show.
Yeah, like
love
is
it.
literally
and
like
he is so, and when you watch him in interviews and then you watch him in the show, you're like, that's not the same person.
No, yeah, he's an amazing actor.
What the heck? Yep. Holy smokes.
Yep.
Like, what kind of commitment did he have between the accent, the culture? Like, mind blown. Mind blown. I literally watched him in an interview one time and I was just like, this is not the same actor. I don't know.
Yeah. No, totally. Like his entire demeanor, even his face, my friend says even his facial muscle changes, like where he does the little, like, kind of looks at you. He's like totally different. But I think he was the one, it was him and two of the main actors from season 1. I don't think a lot of people know this, but like I know different people, like overseas for like Renaissance festivals and stuff. And they had said that he, and this was, I guess, like a couple seasons, maybe like 2 years ago. So after the first 2 seasons were out, but they said that he had originally like went to like one of those museums overseas where like you can actually go and like live the life and stuff. And I guess he worked with a bunch of different people, which I don't think that's widely known. But I thought that was like, again, like commitment to the part, it's like Viggo Mortensen, it's like, you're never going to be able to find another Aragorn like that,
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not real. It's fantasy, or it's not fantasy, but it's not historically accurate. But I mean, it is still set in a period that did exist. The storyline may not have been, 100%, but these people really did exist at one point in time. And we may not know everything because it was God, how many hundreds of years ago, but these people did live like this at one point. So yeah, I mean, you do have to kind of have that understanding of the history that goes into playing these parts. And that totally makes sense.
I just think though, like I'm about to read The Pale Horseman probably next month after I get a couple of other books out of the way. And I'm really excited because, like there's a lot of people I just know, like, book talkers and things who are like for historical fiction that said like, that's like really one of the best ones in the series. But that's one where I'm like, the show, I will watch Uhtred of Edinburgh. Like I have to watch all the seasons though in a row. I've watched season 4 so many times over and over again, and because I love his character, and I love how he brought this character to life, who was amazing. I'm not trying to say the books aren't great, they're amazing, but I just think that in terms of TV shows, that's one of the few that I've seen from a book series
that
that
they've
actually,
done really well.
yeah, that
Mhm.
made me want to read the books more. And
Mhm.
that I'm like, that I can't pick if I liked the first season of Last Kingdom more or the first book. And yeah, I'm hoping that as I get going that the books are better, obviously, because I love reading. But it's just interesting that I'm already have that conundrum. And I'm like, I guess my friend, he goes, well, you want everything to be the Last Kingdom. And he's like, the Last Kingdom is the Last Kingdom. And I said, that's fair, considering even like some of the minor actors and actresses that they have are like, in other shows and movies are like cream of the crop, and
And The Last Kingdom came out in a period where Vikings was pretty popular,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the show The Vikings, and they were
Oh,
coming out
for
with a lot
sure.
of different stuff. But it's like Last Kingdom is like cream of the crop. Like you
Yep.
can't expect everything.
Yeah,
It's almost like domino effect. Like everything just seemed to fit perfectly,
yeah,
align perfectly for that show,
yeah,
between the actors, the plot, the storyline, the writers, the
yeah,
directors. Like it just worked.
yeah.
And it's sad, and it's not that it's sad, but it's just you can't expect that level
Oh
of
no, yeah.
from everything else. It's just you can't.
No,
There's
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah. And I think that's what my friend talked about. He's like, well, at least for 1 through 7 for Game of Thrones, and that's how he felt. And I'm like, I get it, but like, for instance, like season 3 of Last Kingdom, episode 9, about halfway through, like three-fourths way through, like Uhtred has this one speech, and I have gone to that spot, and I can't believe nobody's done a YouTube. Maybe I should just do a YouTube video on the podcast about it and a commentary. But like, it is when I first saw that scene and he gave this speech, and I'm just like my skin literally, like I had goosebumps. And it's
Mhm.
some of the best writing, in particular with the rest of the season and the show.
Right.
Like this turning point, you either go left or you go right. And I'm like, most people don't stick the landing like that, and those writers just
Right.
stuck the landing. And then after that, I was like, well, how on earth do you compete with this season? And then with season 4, I was just like, okay,
Right.
that's how you do it. And
Right.
I'm so bummed that we're only going to get another season 5. But I was happy to hear that they were saying that maybe when the actors are a little older, they'll do some of the, like the later books or
That would
something.
be awesome.
But yeah, but I agree with you. I think it's really hard to compete with that show. I mean,
It is. It is. And I mean, Netflix has done some really amazing things, like The Witcher. Granted, season 2 wasn't as great as season 1, but they have been doing some really good things with some of the adaptations that they've taken on.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I go back and forth with season 1 and 2. I just personally, like from a writer standpoint, I loved how they wrote season 1. I know some people were mad about the timeline. I'm like, I was like confused like everybody else, but then
Oh yeah.
when it got
I
to
just
that
had to
last,
watch it a second time.
oh
Once
my God.
I watched through the first
Oh,
time and I was like, what happened?
yeah,
And
yeah,
then I watched it again and I was like, okay, I get it
yeah,
now.
yeah. I got to that
It was
last
just one of those
episode.
like double take.
Yeah, yeah. I got to the last episode and I was astounded. I was like, that was
Oh,
so,
it was good.
yeah. I knew I wasn't gonna like season 2 as much though, because I liked the writing so much in season 1, as particular with the timeline. But I thought the characters, personally, the character development was better for season 2. The overall storyline I didn't care about as much, but I cared about the characters more, I felt like.
Yeah.
Particularly like
Season 2 was definitely less action,
yeah,
more
yeah.
character development for
And
sure.
obviously,
My only
yeah,
thing I wasn't a fan of for season 2 was just like almost the back and forth. Like we're going here, but we're going back. Then we're going here and we're going back. And it's like,
it was literally we were back in the
like give
castle.
me
Then we're going,
whiplash a little bit
yeah, yeah,
here.
yeah.
Like, what are we doing?
No, totally. And I think that was one of the things because my friend asked, and I was like, he goes, which one do you like more? I was like, it's really hard. I said, but because he's a big storyline person. I said, well, I like the storyline for season 1 way more. And I was
Yeah.
like, but I thought the world building was better. And he goes, so what did he say to me? He goes, well, they had book 2 syndrome. I said, yes, to me, it had book 2 syndrome because you're trying to expand the world and you're trying to expand the characters, but you didn't expand the storyline enough. We almost had I
Right.
felt like I didn't feel like the stakes were high enough for season 2 compared to season 1. I guess
Right.
what I was saying. And then at the end, I was just like, I felt it was lackluster personally.
I agree.
I was like, okay, well, but we need like a whole nother season to explain what just happened. Which we want a continuation, but I just wanted some more closure, I guess, for season 2. And I didn't feel like I got it.
Yeah, it was almost like a little like slow, and then bam, like ball drop. And it was
Yep.
like, okay, all
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Hopefully you'll explain that next season.
Yeah, yeah. And that's how personally I felt with Cobra Kai 2 season 4 is like one, like seasons 1 through 3, there's just so much that happened. And there's so much character development, and there's no book 2 syndrome. But then season 4, I felt like was their book 2 syndrome, and I was just like, you have the first 7 episodes, which it was great, but not, I don't think as great as the last 3. And it was like, bam, the last 3 episodes happen, and you're just like, holy crap! You're like, I probably could have just watched these 3 episodes and still
And
gotten
gotten the rest of it.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. And that's how I
Yep.
felt about The Witcher too. Like the last, like I would say 4 episodes. I don't know if we really needed the first 6 episodes personally. Not
Yeah.
that it wasn't
I get
something
that.
I liked, but yeah, it was just yeah. I'm really excited to go back to those books too. But I think season 3 for that's going to be awesome. I know, obviously, my friend, that's like Cobra Kai too. Like from a writing standpoint, both of those, I think they were writing differently than how they did the first seasons in Cobra Kai and first season of Witcher. And it's like, how do you? My friend, he's like, how do you compete with, that beginning start? And I'm like, I always worry about that for a book too myself. Is like I'm already trying
Yeah.
to think ahead of that. Is like because
Mhm.
I just read Will Wright's second Cradle book, Soulsmith, and I'm like, it was so much better than the first one. And I'm like,
I think that's the biggest challenge that us writers have to deal with is how do we top what we've already done?
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
because I mean, it is kind of like a competition with yourself. You have to,
Oh
you've
yeah,
already done, this stretch, and it's like, okay, but I have to do something that's different, but still consistent with the
yeah,
characters, but is also, you want the reader to come back for more. So it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
how am I going to, without it being ridiculous?
yeah, yeah.
Like, because there is a balance, because there is a fine line between what's acceptable and then what's just absolutely
Yeah.
ludicrous.
No, I totally agree. And I was trying to, I don't know. I just that's where part of me is like, I'm like, I really think I should set my current draft aside because I do want a trilogy. And I'm like, I have certain ideas for book 2, but I'm kind of like, I'd rather kind of think like, where do I want to go with book 2 or
Right.
the trilogy, rather than having to do it later. I'm like, I know
Right.
it's gonna be more work. So part of me is like, well, I should really just go into something else in the meantime and then come back
And
and
sometimes you do need that, that book that, I don't want to say it's a filler, but you do need that journey for them to go through in order to end somewhere
yeah,
else.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
even if it's an entire book, sometimes the character just needs that development, even if it's not action packed. And sometimes that does, there's plenty of series that have those kind of books,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's just may not be as exciting, but it is still necessary.
Yeah. Well, it's like my buddy and I, we're trying to go back to certain reads to analyze for writing where it's like Empire Strikes Back is my favorite movie of all time. And that's a second movie. And it's like how I always try to analyze that. And I'm like, how did you do this exactly? Because there is more character development, but there's also a lot that happens, and it's
Right.
like I always try to analyze that storyline. But there are books, like him and I are thinking back, like we're trying to think of what what book twos out of a trilogy do we really like? Because I feel like series is different, like, and that's maybe why Will White's, I think, Soulsmith works so well. Is that it's not these massive, just one book, 2 and 3. It's a series, and I do feel like Dresden Files is a lot like that. Like book 1 was really good, with Stormfront, but then Full Moon was so much better, in my
Mhm.
opinion. I know a lot of people feel that way, and it's like I don't know. I'm just trying to think ahead. Like I don't want to make those mistakes, and I'd like
Right.
figure it out a little bit more. But that goes back to what you were saying, with your experiences. And I think it's totally fine again to that's why I just said to my friend today, I go, I think I'm finally okay to put this first book down and then to go and, do something else and then come back later.
Yeah, I mean, even with writing my werewolf series, constantly still think about my YA series that I've had on
mm,
hold forever. Like I'm constantly thinking about, because it's a 4 book series. So I'm constantly thinking, well, book 1 technically is already done. I just have like edits and stuff to do. But it's like I'm constantly trying to plot 3 and 4 while trying to plot book 3 of my
yeah.
werewolf series. So it's like it's a jumbled mess.
Yeah. Well, it's like I always think of it like Kevin Hearn's Iron Druid Chronicles is like the druids have different headspaces to be
Mhm.
able to do the spells, be able to fight, and be able to work magic. And
Right.
I think about that and I'm like, it is helpful, I feel like, for ideas and to be able to write one thing, but I don't think I have the type of headspace where I can be really efficient and write this book and then like I can write down ideas for this other one, but I don't think I can really outline, and
Right.
by doing it, I just figured out
It
that
is. It's and when I first started Shadow of Twilight, I was still finishing my YA series. And I also started writing a vampire high fantasy series. And I
oh
was like,
cool.
It was a lot. I was like, at one point, I was like, okay, I can't. It's not that I was getting them mixed up, but I was starting to forget details when I was writing other
Yeah,
books. And I was
yeah,
like, I'm really doing a disservice by trying to focus on all these projects.
yeah,
It's not helping me and it's not helping my writing.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I literally had to like put them down and be like, okay, I have to focus on this one project right now, and I can pick that up later.
yeah, yeah. And I do think it is hard because some days you want to work on the other thing, and then other days it's like I've had to really like slap my hand to be like, no, we have to work on this. It's
Mhm.
not going to always be exciting, and some days you
Right.
got to get through it. But right
Yeah.
now, yeah, like, and I do think it's important for for people to realize that maybe you are going to be in a spot like me where you're just like, it's so much of a jangled mess. I don't know how to fix it right now. And I think
Right.
it's taking a long time to be like, it's fine to walk away and then come back,
Yeah.
a couple weeks or even a month, but I
And
just,
recharging your batteries and
yeah,
taking
yeah,
that break, it's going to help your writing in the
yeah,
end, rather than trying to force yourself to work on a problem that you're really not in the headspace to do
yeah,
so.
yeah,
And then all you could, I mean, you could hurt yourself and hurt your book in the process of doing that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, sometimes you really do need those breaks.
yeah. No, I think that's great advice. And I think you're totally right there.
Yeah.
So I really want to ask you this one off of that second question. So what exactly is fantasy romance and how did you decide on this genre?
Well, I've always been obsessed with fantasy forever. Not to say I don't like other genres, but I have that mentality where there's just already enough garbage going on in the world and I don't need more of it.
I'm so right
So
there
if
with you.
it's got magic and it's got dragons, then I'm in. I'm all in. I'm jumping and I'm not looking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, fantasy is my shtick. I don't stray from it really. I don't do rom-coms. I can't do horror. I'm not a horror person. Don't ever
Yeah,
ask me to read horror. There is enough horror in the world and I do not want to read about it.
yeah,
So I just I stick to fantasy. I like being out of mind, out of body experience that fantasy can give you. I like
yeah,
being transported somewhere else. And that was really what I wanted to focus on. I wanted to write something where someone could be like, imagine themselves in their shoes and imagine that world that's going on around them that's not something that we experience or would ever be able to have here.
yeah,
Um, but I'm a huge fan of character development. Like these characters in these books that we read about, they have to have some kind of relationship, whether it be platonic or romantic. There has to be a connection that keeps me going back and keeps me invested
yeah,
in their journey in their lives. Um, it really reminds me, like we talked about earlier, I was obsessed with Charmed when I was a kid. And I had watched this interview, and it was the creator and the writer who first started Charmed. And he said, when he talked about pitching Charmed to CW, and his quote was, "The show is about sisters who happen to be witches, not witches who happen to be sisters."
oh, yeah,
And that seriously has stuck with me my entire adult life. Like I want to write about a girl who happens to be a werewolf, not a werewolf who happens to be a girl. Like I want it to be about her journey, not just like the magic side of it.
yeah,
So that's really where I've tried to build on. Yes, it's fantasy. Yes, it's got magic and it's got, the goddess and it's got, all these elements, these fantastical elements, but it's really about Amelia, who's my main character in Shadow of Twilight. It's really about her journey, her finding herself, her becoming a woman and finding out, the world isn't really as what she expected it to be, and she really has to adapt and grow in order to survive, her world. So that was really what I wanted to find, that balance. And I want readers to come back for my characters and not just necessarily for the world building.
yeah, yeah. I think you really brought out a really important point though. And I think this is where I've gotten stuck with recently is I do like coming up with character ideas for like I see a piece of art and I'm like I had this one like jade warrior woman that I just love the art for. And I'm like, I really want to create a character for her. But I tried, but it's like I don't have a character idea. And I think you make up a good point there. It's like I think the most successful characters in books are books where you can relate to the character, and especially in fantasy, not necessarily their like their class.
Mhm.
So werewolf or whatever, like, and I think that, like, looking at like Patricia Briggs, for instance, with like Mercy Thompson, like, I don't even think I really care that she's like a like a coyote, like
Right,
shapeshifter. I really like those are great and all, but like I think
right,
you have a good point. Like, I just realized, like, I actually like her character,
right,
the backstory, what she's dealing with, like those things. And I like her as a person because it's not the coyote half that, like they talk about like the mythology aspect a lot, with like she's inquisitive and things, and that's like a coyote. But like I really like her as a person. So I think you bring up a really good point. Like,
mm,
I think of now back to a lot of successful characters. It's not necessarily that I like that they are a fighter or whatever, like
right,
age or whatever. It's like I think Gandalf is interesting because he's Gandalf, not because he's a wizard. I don't even
right,
he doesn't even do that much stuff, but him as a,
right.
like, he does the fireworks, he really enjoys children, he
Mhm.
believes in right and wrong, even though he's got all this power and stuff. Yeah, so I think you make up a really good point there that we haven't really talked about on here yet so far. And I think it's really important for people to, to understand is like maybe that's where some people like me are stuck. Maybe we're trying to write, the wizard rather than, the person. So I think
Yeah,
that's
and I mean, there are, and I'm not to say that there aren't successful books out there or,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
adaptations that aren't successful when it's more technical, when it's more about, the magic system and all that. But I feel like it's the relationships that really keep people
Yeah, yeah.
invested. Like they want to see people survive, that you want them to root for that character. And it's not necessarily the magic that you want to, that you're rooting for them for. It's so that they, whether, like I said, whether it be their best friend, their sibling, their parent, their love interest, like you want them, there has to be that endpoint. And it's not just, oh, I have all this power and I'm king of my world. It's like, okay, but who's beside them?
Yeah, yeah.
Who is surrounding them at the end of the journey? Like there has to be more than just fantastical elements that you're rooting for. Like there has to be an end journey and who's around them at that point.
Yeah. I like how you said who's around them, because I always love the Star Wars books, and it's not because they're science fiction. It's not because like Luke's a Jedi. It's literally because, like, that if there's a situation that pops up with Luke, Han, Leia, Lando, or Chewie, like, it's going to be a great story, and they're
Yeah,
going to help each other. And
because they always have each other's back.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
actually think you make a really great point with why I like The Last Kingdom so much, particularly the TV show, and why I'm excited to get to the Pale Horseman, because you look at the people that he has surround him, and those guys, will go through hell and back for him. And I always think that that is an interesting dynamic and relationship. And
Oh, the relationships make that entire show.
yeah,
Like you
yeah,
just go back for his little band of merry men. Like they
yeah,
just
yeah,
the banter, the
yep,
the
the
loyalty.
loyalty, yeah, yeah.
Oh my God. Like you're just like, "Oh, where do I find one of them?" Like,
Yeah, yeah. And he's such a
yeah,
good season 4. Like, he gives sorry, I don't want to spoil it for him, but he gives up certain things that he's wanted his whole life. And you're just like, it's like Harry Dresden. I think that's why people like his character so much, is you're just like, how you want, I personally want to believe that men like that, like as a man, I want to believe that men like that exist,
Mhm.
and they do the right thing no matter what, even when it
Yeah.
harms them personally,
Yep.
especially protect others, and it's
Because I
like,
think in today's world, everything, we're in this headspace where it's all about us as a person,
yeah,
not like us as a community or us
yeah,
as like a family, even, or whatever dynamic you're in. And I think a lot of people's headspace nowadays is, we've come to this point in society where we are very selfish and we are
yeah.
very, self-caring. And I'm not saying to a certain point you shouldn't care about yourself,
Oh,
but
yeah, yeah.
it's also like, but there has to be things you are willing to give up in your relationships or in your family dynamics, in your work, not to chip away at yourself, but you have to be willing to give yourself to these things to be successful and to
Yeah,
have, it can't just all be you. And that's where I think a lot of these stories, like you said, like Last Kingdom, the amount of things he has to give of himself in order to succeed, in order to win a battle, in his personal life, is really like, it's gut-wrenching sometimes. You
Yeah.
just like feel for him and you just want to cry for him because you're like, there's this great man and he's given up decades of his life, his children, his marriages, like, and what is he getting in return? Not a whole lot, but
Yeah.
he knows he's doing right.
Yeah.
And that's really, it's inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do like, I want to bring up Charm again too, because like the reason that I like Charm so much growing up, and Supernatural is like with the sibling aspect, right? Like,
Yes.
when you look at, Sam and Dean and like, I think just both shows, but like, for instance, like Sam and Dean, and like how many times have they gone to hell and back literally for each other?
Right.
And my brother and I, like, all like we had that type of relationship where, like we could pick on each other or whatever, but as soon as someone
Right.
else says something, and I would always,
Right.
people in town would always be like, don't screw with one of them because you're gonna get
And
both.
I think that's what ties in today's society is we're so quick to give up. Like we're
Yeah,
so quick to just be like, I'm done, I'm walking away.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas like a theme I make in my book is, what are you willing to lose and what are you willing to give up for the ones you love?
mm,
Like love is not, it's not given freely. You have to earn it. You have to work hard for it. And granted, yes, writing and books and TV, there's drama. There has to be. That's what keeps you coming
yeah, yeah,
back. That's what keeps you invested. But you have to be willing to give up parts of yourself in order for you to attain that kind of love that you want. And so that's one major theme that I really stuck with in my writing was like for Amelia, for her journey and her Shadow of Twilight and Dust to Dawn. And then my third book, what are you willing to give for the ones you love?
yeah,
What are you willing to sacrifice for the ones you love? And I don't just necessarily mean like, someone has to die, but like it could just be small things. Like
oh,
love is fought for hard with blood, sweat, and tears. It is not just it's not a fairy tale. And that's the main thing I wanted to really portray was it's not all, true love conquers all. And yes, it can, but it's gritty, it's hard, it's rough, it can really wear you down, and sometimes you really do have to take a step back and walk away for a little bit and then come back and find each other. And that's what I really wanted to push in my book was love is rough, love is hard on everything, and it's not just easy, it's not all lovey-dovey. You really have to work for it.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a great theme personally, is putting a more, I guess my friend would say, put more of a realistic expectation
Mhm.
for romance. Yeah, because I don't know, we were just talking about the other day, and we were trying to we were discussing, different romances that we both like in terms of movies, TV shows, things like that. And we were really like talking about a lot where I didn't realize, a lot of things were actually could be considered romance. So we
Mhm.
were having that discussion, and it was interesting that she had also brought up, like that type of trying to come up with a realistic feeling and expectations for relationships rather than these, I don't know, Hollywood, or I just feel like the early 2000s, there was a lot of books and movies where it was like there was this fake, I guess it was just like fake romance, I guess. I don't know how to describe it. We're a
We're
cheap
almost
romance.
forced.
Yeah, forced romance. Like,
Yeah.
it was a forced romance. And then
Yep.
like
I feel like Shadow of Twilight is a big one of those. Like it set a really high expectation for that kind of stuff. And I'm not to say that love can't conquer all. And I believe that it can. I truly do believe, personally, I believe that love can conquer, most obstacles. But there are obstacles. Like it's
yeah.
just not just because you love someone that's it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
there
It's not
are
like a
things.
roadblock that goes up. And then
Right. You
it's
still
fine.
have to go over those hurdles. You still have to figure that out together. And, some people don't always mesh right away in the beginning. Like there are, you both have to go through personal growth. And
Yeah.
as you continue to go through these relationships, you grow not only separately, but as people and together in a relationship. So that was really, serious themes I really considered with my writing, just because I wanted it to be realistic. I
Yeah.
wanted these relationships to be, I want you to empathize with them, but I also want you to be like, oh, yeah, life, it really is kind of like that. Like it really can be rough. And just because you're in a crappy situation doesn't mean you get to just walk away. And it doesn't mean
Yeah.
you want to walk away.
Yeah.
You should want to fight for that. So Those were things I really stuck with.
Yeah, I like that. I just think I'm thinking like like I'm rewatching Castle, and I really like him and Kate's relationship because you're kind of like they have a lot of good, but you're also like, God, they had to put up with a bunch of crap. There's just like so much stuff, and
Right.
I think that's why I really liked like Mercy and Adam, for instance, because like that's another one where it's like you think like every other book they like one of them almost dies, and it's like,
Right.
and they know, right, that like there's like it's
I mean, and again, there's balance. There's sometimes that's too much, and sometimes there's not enough.
yeah,
Um, Sometimes it's like, okay, how much more crap can this couple go through?
yeah,
It's not really realistic anymore. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
well, like Grey's Anatomy at this point
Oh
is
my
like, okay,
gosh.
when are we going to be done? Like, let's go.
Yeah.
How many more car accidents and plane
Yep.
crashes can we go through?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, there has to be trials, and there has to be um difficulties. Like my Shadow of Twilight, my first book, compared to my second book, they read very different. Like, the setting for Shadow of Twilight, they're 18 and 22. They're, just figuring out who they are. And then they meet. And it's like, okay, we're these two people separately now. We don't know each other, but who are we together? And then figuring that out. And then Dusk to Dawn is literally a 17-year gap.
Oh wow.
And it's like, and they were separated during that time. So it's like,
Mhm.
okay, we were these two people separately. Now we found our way back to each other, but who are we now
Yeah, yeah.
as adults, as 30 something adults? How do we figure that out? And book two is much darker. It's got a lot of trigger warning. Like, it's a lot darker, it's a lot heavier, because as you age, you deal with a lot more crap.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
deal
yeah.
with a lot more darker themes. So I wanted to keep with that theme of, how we view the world at 18 is not what it's like when we're 36,
Yeah.
37. It's very different. So yeah, those were things I tried to keep up with.
Oh, see, and that to me is more interesting because you just brought up so much, especially like we talked about book two, right? Like you just brought up a great reason why within your story itself, you can talk more about character development.
Right.
You know what I mean? And like character relate, like you just because of that idea, like in that concept, I just feel like you have a whole different way of writing book two now
Yeah.
where it'll make more sense.
Mhm.
You can do some of the things that other people have tried to do with a book two, but for you, I feel like it'll fit better within that.
Oh yeah, and like I've gotten a lot of feedback when it comes to book two, and they're like, "Oh, this character grew so much." I'm like, "But he had, like, it shouldn't be a shock. Like, he had to.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah,
17 years later. That's boring if he's stagnant. Like, he
yeah,
had to have grown. I'm not trying to give anything away, but like, that's a big gap. That's a
yeah,
big gap between two people, and even in time. So, who I was when I was 18 years old is not who I am now at 30 years
yeah.
old. Like, of course, there's going to be changes. So, yes, Amelia's got powers, and yes, she has visions, and she's going through all these battles, and physically and internally. But it's also realistic. It has to be a realistic journey. So that's again, what I learned from reading other books that I enjoy just to read, but I didn't like. Those were one of the things I really wanted to stick with was, yes, it's fantastical. Yes, it's fantasy. It's paranormal. It's werewolves. It's rogues. It's vampires. It's, killing and magic and, mythology all wrapped in one. But these are also people.
Yeah.
Like, they're also, yes, they may be half wolf, but they're still human to their core. Like, they still have to have those same journeys that we would normally go through anyways.
That's actually a really good part right there. So when it comes to like, I guess like not really necessarily even world building